Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? The world is divisive enough. You don't have to look very far to figure that out. And in the spirit of the subject of this video, just want to be clear that, what I'm saying in this video isn't really pointed at anybody. Just, it's too divisive. So, the RPG game hobby can be extraordinarily divisive, and I don't believe that is helpful at all. And very often, when we're looking at the diversity of the hobby and recognizing the diversity of the hobby and diversity of intentions, diversity of game styles and playing styles, it's too easy and it's not helpful to start being divisive when we do that and to separate people into us and them, because invariably that leads to judgment. And my way is a better way, and you're wrong, and you can't define this. My definition is better than your definition, and that sort of thing. I don't believe that is helpful. The role-playing game hobby as a whole is very, very broad. The amount of games that are out there and what they are like is incredibly broad and incredibly varied. I don't believe that we can single out one type or group of role-playing games and say that these are true role-playing games and the other ones aren't, and start to categorize them into other games which might be adjacent, but they're not role-playing games. Because at the end of the day, very often, this comes from our own biases and preferences and how we like to role-play or how we like to play these games. Which subset of these games do we like? And so we divide the hobby up unfairly in terms of this is role-play, these are role-playing games, and these aren't. I don't believe that's helpful. To me, I believe that there are a number of games out there that are all RPGs, and there's an incredible variety of difference between them. Likewise, I don't believe that it's helpful to start to define what roleplay is in a limited fashion. It's much more helpful to define what kind of role-playing I like and what kind of role-playing you like, because there are so many different preferences, so many different intentions for being in the hobby in the first place. And as I've said before, how you define role-playing depends upon those intentions. And so singling out one thing and calling, well, this is real role-play, I don't believe is helpful. It's helpful for you to figure out your kind of role-play, but not to divide up the hobby in that manner. I believe that ends up causing more harm than good. What I do believe is helpful is when we start to look at the diversity in the hobby, it's helpful to start to look at where these divisions are, where these divisions in preference. Why do we tend to play in certain ways? Why do other people tend to play in other ways? Why are they doing that? It's helpful to recognize those sorts of things because we are able to have practical application from that. We're able to find out, for example, what do I like in the first place? Most people really aren't able to even define that, to define what kind of role-playing game experience they like and what it looks like. And it's usually a hard-won experience through a lot of positive and negative feedback where you find, well, that was great, but I didn't really like doing this particular game, or this group prevented me from doing this, stifled my attempts to do that. This other one encouraged me to do this, or this particular game really helped me to do that. And we start to find out where our preferences are, not just preferences, but what actually works for us. We start to discover our own intention for playing in the first place. And by looking at some of the models that are more popular or more recognizable, and some other models, this can be very helpful. Where I think we stumble and fall an awful lot is where we start to get hung up on the definition of words and the definitions of terms. And we start to look at a model that somebody has made, and if we start to just disagree with, I don't like the way they define this word, we miss the concepts behind that and the concepts behind those words. And I think looking at the concepts is essential to figuring these things out and to being able to evaluate them effectively and to compare them one to another. So I think very often we need to make the mental leap to accept words that maybe we would use different definitions. And believe me, I'm a person that believes in precision in language, but it is what it is. And so I believe it's much more helpful to not get hung up on those things and see the bigger picture. Ultimately, I believe it can be helpful once we start to recognize the diversity and diversity in intention without being divisive. We can start to see, where we can find common ground with our friends. We can start to see how do we both need to modify our approach so that we can play together. We can also find out that sometimes there's games that we shouldn't play together because our intentions clash too much. We talk to each other and we're able to figure these things out if we have, a framework to think about and discuss these things. That's why these things are helpful. It's also extraordinarily helpful, practically to, once again, find out what you like, what I like. And I believe it's really, really helpful to define your role-playing game experience preference. Like, what do I want out of a role-playing game session? What does it for me? Without defining it by behaviors, but just defining it by the end goal. I want a role-playing game experience that is like this, that feels like this, that makes me feel like this, that is great, or, it doesn't suck for me. I could have said that better, but you know what I mean. And defining, by the end state. What am I looking for? At that point, that brings up another point is, part of the problem with being very prescriptive about, well, here are the things you should do to have a good role-playing game experience, or even if it's the same role-playing game experience that I want, if I start to give you a prescription for it, different people require slightly different recipes to get to that same end state. And so it's incredibly divisive and not very helpful to come up with one prescriptive way. This is the one true way to play. Doesn't help anybody. But it's not terribly helpful either to come up with a highly prescriptive way to get a certain experience. There are techniques we can use to maybe help. And it might work for you, it might not. Try them out. That's a much more helpful way to go about it. But it's been my hard-won experience, and talking with people like even in the RPG Techniques Consortium, where it's been my experience that there aren't any real universal techniques. There's ones that may be helpful and get closer to universal, but at the end of the day, there aren't any techniques that are useful. It's also, and I don't want the video to be this long, it's helpful to define or think about and talk about role-playing games as their own medium, rather than trying to define them in terms of other media, film, writing, improv, acting, all those sorts of things. It's much more helpful to look at them for what they are, as broad as that is, rather than trying to define them and come up with techniques and procedures based upon these other media. So, talking about RPGs, it requires some thought. It requires being mature. It requires being willing to examine our diversity without being divisive. It requires being not just seeking to be understood, but seeking to understand. And seeking to know thyself. What is true for me? And then how do I get that? How do I find other people that want close to the same thing? And then how do we play together effectively? That's it. That's my thought for today, kids.